High leverage practices have been called fundamental and critical because they help students learn important content. These practices are basically overarching principles of instruction that allow us to reach students in different ways. Each one of these practices is broken up in different strategies that support that practice. The specific practice that we're going to focus on is number 13, adapt curriculum tasks and materials for specific learning goals. So on highleveragepractices.org, where all these are outlined, it informs us that teachers assess individual student needs and adapt curriculum materials and tasks so that students can meet instructional goals. Teachers select materials and tasks based on student needs, use relevant technology, and make modifications by highlighting relevant information, changing task directions and decreasing amounts of material. Teachers make strategic decisions on content coverage, meaningfulness of tasks to meet stated goals, and criteria for student success. So this idea of adapting the curriculum and materials to meet the specific goals is going to be outlined in a specific strategy by Kalia called non-linguistic representation. This non-linguistic representation is a way to modify the curriculum to reach more students and to ultimately help them reach their goals. So you can see how this strategy falls under the practice or principle of adapting curriculum tasks and materials for specific learning goals, or HLP number 13.
Hi, we're going to tell you a little bit about non-linguistic representation. Non-linguistic representation falls under high leverage practice strategy number 13, which is to adapt curriculum tasks and materials for specific learning goals. So why would we use non-linguistic representation? Well, a lot of our instruction is done linguistically. We speak to our class, we teach that way, we write, and we have them read. So it's really important to give our students an opportunity to present what they have learned and their knowledge and understanding non-linguistically. There is something called dual code theory, and that is an idea where our brains like to store information linguistically and non-linguistically. So it's really important to give our students this chance to use that type of coding to really solidify their knowledge and understanding about concepts that we want to teach them.
All students in special education with an IEP have goals. They have annual goals and they have short-term objectives. And the high-level practice number 13 of modifying curriculum and strategies to help them achieve those goals virtually applies to all of those grades because they all have goals that need to be met and have special educators whose job is to help them meet those goals. So the strategy, NLR, non-linguistic representation, that falls under this practice, I would say also applies to all those grades, kindergarten through 12th grade, because any way that we can help a student meet their goals is important and it can be effective. So you'll see as grades get older, more and more push towards linguistic representation through reading and writing. And then in younger grades, you'll see more non-linguistic representation through pictures and acting and things like that. But I think it's important to apply the strategy of non-linguistic representation to all grades, to anyone who's struggling to take in the information the way it's being presented, whether it's through textbook or lecture. By presenting information and then allowing the students to represent their learning through something like non-linguistic representation, it gives opportunity for more students to be reached. Now, in our educational psychology class, we learned that memory is stored through connections, and the more diverse ways this content is connected, the deeper that memory is going to go, from the working short-term memory to the long-term memory. And so this applies to non-linguistic representation because by allowing students to learn and to represent the information and content linguistically and non-linguistically, you're giving them an opportunity to deeper store and represent knowledge they may not otherwise be able to learn, and ultimately that will help them achieve their goals.
Non-linguistic representation can take place in any subject area and with any grade level, and it's important to be using non-linguistic representation consistently with our students so they can start to understand that this is a really appropriate way to show their knowledge and to code things into their brain to store it into long-term memory. So how do we use non-linguistic representation? There are lots of different ways. It's really innumerable, whatever you can think of that would work with your students. Some examples are kinesthetics, so having them act something out or moving their bodies to show you what they're learning. You can have them use graphic organizers, pictographs. You can have them create models, use manipulatives. There are all different ways that they can represent their knowledge. Here are some things to be aware of when implementing non-linguistic representation. You want to make sure that your students are representing only the most crucial part of the lesson. So you really want to encode that really important information. They can kind of go down rabbit holes if you let them. So make sure they're representing the really crucial part of the lesson. Another thing is that it takes time. It takes a little extra time out of the day, so make sure you're scheduling that time in. It's important to have your students explain their representation when they're done. So they can do that in pairs, in small groups, to you, to the whole class. It's a really key component of non-linguistic representation that they verbally explain what they have represented. And another thing that we need to be sure that we're doing is giving students a chance to revise their representation if need be. So if you notice there's a misconception or something they don't quite understand, then we need to reteach that concept or explain it a little more clearly, and then have them redo their representation so that when it codes into their brains, they're getting all the right information and they're not coding misconceptions. So Mason is going to help us see some examples of non-linguistic representation. He is going to represent the word tremble, which is a second grade vocabulary word. So what was important to note is that I taught him the word tremble before I had him do his representations. I gave him a student-friendly definition, and then we talked about it so that I knew that he understood the word. And then I gave him the opportunity to use actions to represent the word tremble. And then he also had an opportunity to draw the word tremble. There are lots of different ways that students can non-linguistically represent their knowledge, and it's important to give them opportunities to do it different ways and know that they can use different representations for the same idea. There are a lot of different ways that you can implement this in your classroom. Mason, can you explain your representation of tremble?
Tremble means when you're, like, if you're cold or if you're scared, you quivel, like, shrivel, like, do this when you're, like, uncontrollably.
Hey Mason, can you explain your drawing of the word tremble?
Okay, so tremble, as you can see here, this kid was having fun in the pool with his friends, throwing the ball, the beach ball. And then he got out and he was super cold and he was shaking, like as the arrows you can see, and that he was shaking like he was trembled from the coldness of the pool.
I see.
And as the wind blows, the colder it gets.
So the arrows represent the trembling, and the picture of the pool explains why he was trembling.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
So you've seen a couple of examples of non-linguistic representation that you could use in your own classroom, and I hope that you will consider using this high leverage practice because it's really beneficial for all students, and particularly for students with special needs. It gives them a chance to use a different kind of skill set to represent and demonstrate their knowledge, which can be really beneficial. And it also, when they explain their representation, gives them increased opportunities for social interaction, which is really crucial for our special needs kiddos. So I hope that you'll consider using some non-linguistic representation in your own classroom. We're also adding a resource sheet, and so you'll have a little bit more information about why it's so important and some more ideas of how to use it in your classroom. Thanks.